Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for NCEA's Promoting Our Catholic Identity Through Instruction in Data and Statistics webinar. My name is Kate Reich, and I am the organizer for today's event. Before we begin, please know that all of your microphone connections have been muted. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please send those through the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last 45 minutes, and any questions that you have asked will be addressed in the remaining time. Later this evening, you will receive an email asking you to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar, and for those of you who are attending this webinar live, information about creating a certificate of attendance. I thank you in advance for providing us with feedback about today's event. We will also be sending you another email with instructions on accessing this recorded webinar and presentation files in another business day or two. Before we begin, we wish to extend our gratitude to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their generous support of this webinar, which is an extended offering of the NCEA Common Core math workshops that took place in the summer of 2013. Now I am very happy to introduce Sister Edward William Quinn, who is the Director of Elementary Curriculum and Instruction with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Sister Edward has presented extensively on the Catholic Identity Curriculum Integration Collaborative, formerly known as the Common Core Catholic Identity Initiative, and she is on hand with us today to present on instruction with data and statistics. Please welcome Sister Edward.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon as I speak about a topic that is very dear to my heart. And when you think of the topic, I'm sure you're thinking of the data and statistics, but the topic that's so dear to my heart is promoting our Catholic identity. For many years as an elementary teacher, I spent 37 years in the elementary classroom, and I taught math for a good number of those years. Back in time, one of my favorite quotes about mathematics is a quote from Galileo that says, "Mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe." And I'd like to keep that in mind as I work with today's presentation on promoting our Catholic identity through instruction in data and statistics. When we take a look at the workings of data and statistics, we have to focus back on what the Catholic bishops told us in the document To Teach as Jesus Did. They were given a mandate during the Second Vatican Council in the document Declaration on Christian Education that the mission to teach as Jesus did is a very dynamic mandate for Christians of all times, places, and conditions. And Catholic schools are distinguished in their role and their ability to integrate those faith values with life. And I find that one of those areas is in the area of math instruction. Catholic education needs to enable personal and social transformation in the light of Catholic values. I'm sure when you look at this picture you think, this is the classroom of old. It reminds me of my first class that I had 84 first graders. Numbers were big back then. And I think to myself, children are so different today. We're living our mission in the 21st century, not the 20th century. The history of our Catholic schools in our country has been very diverse and very expansive. Our Catholic schools have educated millions of young people over the years by providing them with a superior academic background, always pointing the way to eternal life. The success of Catholic schools in handing on the faith, generation after generation, is a bright light in the history of the Church and in the history of the Church in the United States. We can trace our roots back to the very first Catholic schools back in the 1700s in our country, and we've been doing a superior job since then. But the Catholic bishops were very adamant about integrating our instruction with connections to our faith. And for that reason, we have been working on the past several years on the Catholic identity curriculum integration. Anybody who is a good teacher realizes that no one content area stands in isolation. And the one area that we really have the mandate to move into with all our content areas is our faith values. When we take a look at the national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic elementary schools that was promulgated in the year 2012, one of the defining characteristics was that we are distinguished by excellence, and excellence in all areas of the curriculum, and excellence in mathematics as well. We look at Standard 7. An excellent Catholic school has a clearly articulated, rigorous curriculum. And I like that word rigorous because it means more than just memorize the facts. It means that we start developing critical thinking skills, higher level thinking skills that are aligned with relevant standards, the 21st century skills that our students will need to lead them into the future. And these need to be integrated with our gospel values and always through effective instruction. When we take a look at why the Catholic identity curriculum integration, we look at the first benchmark. The curriculum has to adhere to appropriate delineated standards. We realize that there are people that are that have misinterpreted standards. They think standards are curriculum. When we take a look at standards, standards are really the set of skills that we are teaching our students. The curriculum is how we do that. And it is our goal to ensure that every student successfully completes that rigorous sequence of academic skills that is based on standards, but also rooted in gospel values. The next benchmark talks about how standards are adopted across the curriculum, not isolated into any one area of the curriculum, and have to include the integration of the religious, spiritual, moral, and ethical dimensions of learning in all content areas. So if we're going to plan for instructional success in the area of mathematics, we need to take a look at curriculum that, first of all, is Christ-centered. We have to take a look at curriculum that involves catechesis, involves creativity, a curriculum that talks about communication or utilizes communication skills. So if we're going to plan for instructional success in mathematics, it's very important that we make use of these skills. We take a look at what the definition of a curriculum is. Curriculum includes what's taught, when it's taught, how it's taught, and how we're going to measure if a student has learned the skills or content. One of the things in working with the teachers that I work with and working with the administrators in our diocese, I have found, and I always emphasize with them, very important in the planning of any lessons is that we determine from the get-go, from the very start, how we're going to measure how a student has learned the skills or content. Our assessments are tied into our curriculum. We need to know how we're going to measure. We need to include what materials are to be used by the students and the teachers. None of these items is included in Common Core standards because standards are basically a list of the skills. There are things that, the things that are mentioned above that are things that need to be determined by the principals and the teachers who are working with the students. The Catholic Identity Curriculum Integration in our Catholic schools, our materials are chosen that represent our Catholic teaching and tradition. We can go back to the days when we had the New Cathedral Basic Readers, perhaps, or we had Progress in Arithmetic that was able to use word problems. that talked about the CYO, or it talked about father so-and-so, but we weren't, as time went on, they kind of faded into the background. We moved away from the traditional textbooks. It's important that our Catholic school teachers find quality Catholic resources that will support the teaching of the faith. All that said, the webinar that we're doing today will strive to provide some of those resources that you might be able to use to build quality Catholic math curriculum for your students. So what are some of the sources for the faith-based topics that you can use? First and foremost, scriptures. There are many, many opportunities from the scriptures that we can draw on for math problem solving. Problem solving is one of the key features of the scriptures that I find very interesting. Problem solving doesn't always have to involve numbers. I think Jesus was one of the greatest problem solvers that there ever was. He had a problem solving method that is far superior to any problem solving method that we could ever develop. We also need to look at the themes of Catholic social teaching. And you see those listed on the left side of my screen. Life and dignity of the human person, call to family, community, and participation. What are rights and responsibilities? Our options for the poor, dignity of work and the rights of workers, solidarity, and care for God's creation. We also can draw from our church history, from our liturgical calendar, and from current faith-based events. And what I hope to share with you today are examples from each one of these areas that you can take back and perhaps use in your classroom at whatever level you are working with. When we take a look at the difference between curriculum and standards, we need to realize that standards such as the Common Core State Standards are just the sets of skills. And I mentioned this before, and I can't emphasize that enough, that standards are different than curriculum. Standards are not new to Catholic schools in this country. The Catholic educational community has been using standards. I can date the work that I've done back into standards, dating back to at least 1980, when the Agenda for Action was developed by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And the first standard that they had was problem solving should be the focus of math education in the 1980s. We've come a long way since then, okay, but we are still using standards. They are not something that is new to Catholic education. We look at the standards for data and statistics at the elementary levels in grades K through 5. Data concepts are generally associated with measurement topics, and you'll see some examples of that as I go on. At the middle school levels, grades 6 through 8, data concepts are linked to statistics and probability. We take a look at the standards for mathematical practice, and I think that these are very important because I think these are key to understanding the standards as we are using them at the present time. These standards for mathematical practice describe the varieties of expertise that teachers at all levels should seek to develop in their students. And I'm going to show you examples of how these standards for mathematical practice can be applied to faith-based mathematics education. These standards for mathematical practice, some of them are not new. We can look at problem solving, reasoning, improved communications, representations, and connections. They were a part of the NCTM's curriculum evaluation standards, which were developed back in the late 1980s. The second group are the strands of mathematical proficiency that were specified in the National Research Council's report, Adding It Up, reasoning, strategic competence, fluency, and productive disposition. They are all important, okay? So with with all that background, I'm going to share with you some sample grade level applications, beginning with the first grade level and going all the way up to the 8th grade level. I've taken the concept of faith-based education in the mathematics classroom, and I'm going to give you an example at each level of how this can be applied. In the first grade, in the standards, students are expected to record data with tally charts, picture graphs, tables. They're asked to interpret data with tally charts. They're asked to interpret bar graphs, and often ask the question, well, which graph is correct? Which one best represents the data? So at this level, I went to Scripture, and I took the example of Jesus using 5 fish and 2 loaves of bread to feed the people. And I showed the children an example of a chart and didn't ask them the question, how many fish were there, how many loaves are represented in the chart. Rather, I asked them a higher level thinking question. Does the chart show the story of Jesus using 5 fish and 2 loaves of bread to feed the people? If the first chart does not represent that, I gave them a blank chart so that they can show whether or not the first chart was correct. Now, I also used a question that may have caused the children to be concerned if they know the story of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. So again, I'm asking them a higher level thinking skill that is a faith-based thinking skill. So if I've told the story in my religion class of Jesus, or if I've used a little religion video that may have shown the example of Jesus feeding all the people with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, I can use my mathematical skill to develop a chart to represent that. And that brings in the mathematical practice of representation, problem solving. I'm asking them to use reasoning and proof. I'm also asking them to communicate. I'm asking them to talk about it. Okay? So with all of that, we are looking to make use of structure in solving problems. If you notice in this problem, there are no addition signs, subtraction signs. There's no number sentences, as it were. But are we developing mathematical skills? Yes. Okay. At the 2nd grade level, children are asked, the standards tell us that children should generate measurement data by measuring lengths of several objects to the nearest whole unit, or by making repeated measurements of the same object. At this level, they're also asked to draw a picture graph and a bar graph with a single unit scale to represent data set up with up to 4 categories. Okay, they can solve simple put together, take apart, comparison problems. There are all the different types of subtraction using information presented through a bar graph. So for this concept, keeping a faith-based focus, I took a problem of 4 2nd grade classes collecting soda cans to recycle. In this problem, I am looking at the social issue of taking care of God's creation. I'm recycling, which is a value that we can focus on in a faith-based context. Okay? So I ask them first, they make a chart of how many cans, empty soda cans, did the different classes collect. And from that, they created a graph showing the data. I can extend that problem even farther by asking them questions such as, how many more cans did room 12 collect than room 22? And here are your subtraction concepts, but they can use the graph to solve that as well as a subtraction equation. Going farther, using the same data, I could ask them the question, how many cans did they collect all together? So here I am focusing on a faith aspect, caring for God's creation, and solving the mathematics problems. I can take that and extend that problem even farther. I can use the extension, if each can earned a nickel for the missions, how much did each class earn for the missions? How much did the whole second grade earn for the missions? So I can go, even farther using that simple piece of data. Again, a piece of data that is based on a faith concept. Okay. Moving on to the third grade. Again, we are building on the concepts that they've learned earlier. Children are expected to draw a scaled picture graph or a scaled bar graph to represent a data set with several categories. So here they're also expected to be able to solve 1 and 2 steps, how many more, how many less problems, using information presented through the scaled bar graphs. For example, if the students were asked to draw a bar graph in which each square in the bar graph might represent $5, we could ask them a lot of, well, what if? And suppose questions, which change the conditions of the problems. Here's an example of my question. The classes at St. Matthew's School held a mission drive to assist a family who lost everything in a fire. Again, we're applying Catholic social values, care for the poor, family, community, and participation, Catholic social values. This graph shows what each class from 3rd grade through 8th grade collected. And here I'm using a picture graph with each dollar sign representing $5. So here are their mission contributions. When you think of it, think of all the different questions. And I'm going to ask you to stop for a minute and formulate 2 or 3 questions that you might ask those 3rd graders who are looking at that graph. Now, what kind of questions did you come up with? If we go back to the original premise, you might ask questions like, how much more than, how much altogether, or which class had the most, which class had more, how many classes had more than $25 collected. The number of questions could go on and on. You might even ask the students to formulate questions, just like I asked you to stop for a minute and look at the graph and write some of your own questions. That's something you could ask the students to do, to work with those questions. Now, I could take that same data and represent the same data in a bar graph. And again, I could ask the very same questions. Which class raised the most? How much more did the 8th grade raise than the 3rd grade? What was the total amount raised? Here's your difference between the 1-step and the 2-step, 3-step problems. I move on to the 4th grade. And the 4th grade are expected to create a line plot to display a data set of measurements in fractions of a unit, such as 1/2, 1/4, and 1/8. Here they're asked to solve problems involving addition and subtraction of fractions by using, those dreaded fractions that everyone does not like to teach, or children don't really like to work with sometimes. But we can use those fractions to solve problems and make them easier for them to understand by using concepts of data and statistics and using information presented in line plots. Here I'm going back to Scripture, and I'm asking them to look at a line plot on a map and interpret the difference in length between the longest and shortest routes from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And here's a map of the Holy Land, and I have a star at the top and a star at the bottom representing Nazareth and Bethlehem and their locations, but I've used a line plot here. And each section on the line plot represents a different fraction. And I show them by the diamond in the middle that that's 1/2. So I can take a look at the other segments and see that each segment represents 1/8. And if I give them the information that says 1/2 is about 40 miles, think of all the questions we could ask them. Suppose they took a different route than a direct route. Suppose they went by way of another city. How long would it take them? Or when I'm talking in terms of the fractions. So if half of the line that I have represents 40 miles, and if I were to measure that line, and this is one skill that I find working with our students, that I find children do not really understand these little symbols on a map and distances that they represent. So this is a skill that goes beyond the mathematics classroom, also into the social studies classroom, and using map scales. If I were to take this and realize that the diamond in the middle represents about half the distance, and I said that that's about 40 miles, if I went 40 miles in a different direction, where might I land? So they're all mathematics skills that are integrated with a face value. I'm recalling to mind the trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem, but I am also teaching them a math skill as well as a mathematics skill. In grade 5, our students are being asked to make line plots to display a data set of measurements in fractions of a unit. Again, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. They're using operations on fractions for this grade to solve problems involving information presented in the line plot. So I gave them data, and this was data that I pulled up off of the internet from the Pew Foundation. The 10 countries with the largest number of Catholics. It surprised me when I looked at the data. I was surprised myself to find out that Mexico had a larger population of Catholics than the United States, because I don't personally think of that as being a larger amount. But it was interesting to look at the data, to talk about the data, and to look at the different percentages that were there. Now, I'm not really going to focus on the percentages at that level as much as I am the population, and look at that chart with the population and create a line graph based on the data in that chart. Now, students at this level should be technologically savvy enough to use a program such as Microsoft Excel, where they can plug in the data to Excel and create a line graph, even a bar graph or a circle graph. But they can create a line graph and use that line graph to answer questions about the data. I can also take those questions and apply them in terms of fractions. For example, if I realized that Brazil has the largest Catholic population, and the Brazil population is above 120 million, well, what country might be about half of that? Can I find a country that would be about half of that, or about 1/4 of that? If it's above 120 million, if I went 1/4 of 120 million, might be a little bit above 30 million, and I might look at the Congo and say the Congo Catholic population is about 1/4 of that from Brazil. And I could work with a variety of different problems there related to the data in that chart. All at the same time in the background, I am focusing on something, statistics that are related to our faith, our Catholic population. Children might ask you, well, why does Mexico have a larger Catholic population than the United States? Again, there's an opportunity to go back into the history of the cultures in those different countries, integrating church history a little bit into that. At the 6th grade level, students, according to the standards, students are asked to display numerical data in plots on a number line, and that would include dot plots, histograms, box plots, and they're asked to summarize numerical data sets in relation to their context. And there's examples there, reporting a number of observations, describing the attributes under investigation, including how it was measured and its units of measurement. Okay, for example here, and this was something I really found very, very fascinating, the book of Numbers in the Old Testament. I always wondered, you know, this was something that we never really studied because it was never really emphasized in Bible history in my day in school. But the book of Numbers uses a lot of numerical data, takes the 12 tribes of Israel and tells the number from each of the tribes that were a part of the men who composed the army of Israel. So when you take a look at those numbers right from the Bible, okay, provides us with a lot of great data. When I take that, I can take and create a bar graph to display that very data. But I can also take and create a circle graph showing the percentage of each tribe in the Army. At the 6th grade level, I am working a lot more with percentages, but here is a circle graph, and I realize on the picture you have there, it's not as big as I would like to have put it, but I just wanted to compare side by side the bar graph and the circle graph. When I take a look at those, I could ask the students which of those two graphs best represents the data. When I take a look at the bar graph, it's not as colorful as the circle graph, and it doesn't have the percentages on it that the circle graph has. But when I look at the slices of pie in this circle graph, a lot of them are very similar. And it doesn't as clearly define the comparison of the numbers in each part of the army, of Israel's army. So again, you have an opportunity to use some faith-based numbers when you're working with the data of comparative data, using bar graphs and deciding which is the most appropriate type of graph to use with the students. Again, students at this level should be able to use the programs such as Microsoft Excel to create these graphs and make comparisons of the data using the graphs. But why not use the data from faith-based concepts rather than just taking secular data? I could also take a look, one of the skills at this level is looking at measures of central tendency. There are, on Pinterest, if you're familiar with Pinterest, there are several Pinterest boards that talk about numbers in the Bible. And they have some very interesting graphics there showing representation of different numbers from the Bible. And I have a few of them here in this presentation. I found this one very fascinating. It not only refers to the Psalms and the number of each time musical instruments appear in the Psalms, but it also represents the data in a very creative way. Okay, so when I take a look at this, the number of times each instrument appears in the Psalms, I can find the range, mean, median, and mode of that set of data from that graphic that is represented. And I think, you know, you can find a lot of examples of things like this on bulletin boards like Pinterest, rather than having to look up the data yourself. There are a lot of creative people out there who have already provided different graphics like this that you are able to use. Okay. At the 7th grade level, we're using data from a random sample to draw inferences about a population with an unknown characteristic of interest. So we want to generate multiple samples, simulated samples of the same size to gauge the variation in estimates or predictions. The example I have here is an example that extends into the language arts class. Poetic images in the Psalms. And again, this was a graphic I picked up from a Pinterest board that said numbers in the Bible. It uses a random sampling from one or two, asking the students, here are the 10 most common poetic images used in the Psalms and the number of times they appear. So the poetic images, first of all, of the skies and the heavens appears 107 times in the Psalms. The poetic image of water, 94 times. When we take a look at that, it would be a good thing to do to have the students use a random sampling from one or two Psalms and have the students work in small groups to examine the Psalms to identify any of the poetic images that are listed on the image to the left. To have them compare the results found in each group to determine if the random sampling was a good indicator of the frequency of the poetic images found in the Psalms. I know in our own curriculum here, poetic images found in scriptures are often something we refer to. We use the Psalms as a form of poetry in our English language arts curriculum. And I think this would be a wonderful collaboration between the English language arts teacher and the math teacher to take a look at those poetic images and to be able to look at random sampling and to do an activity or an exercise in which they use random sampling of several or a few of the Psalms in small groups and compare them. Now, of course, it depends a lot on the Psalms that you select for the small groups, but at any rate, it's good to see the frequency. You're going to see more references to water, definitely, than you're going to find references to the servant concept. Okay. At the 8th grade level, students are asked to understand that patterns of association can also be seen in bivariate categorical data by displaying frequencies and relative frequencies in a two-way table. At this level, they're asked to construct and interpret a two-way table summarizing data on two categorical variables collected for the same subjects. Okay, here's an example, and I'm taking this from a current event in the church. Here in Philadelphia, we are very, very excited about the prospect of our Holy Father visiting our country in September. So I'm very conscious of the upcoming World Meeting of Families, which is a current event in the church. It has been told to us that people are coming from all over the world, and we will have people of many different languages coming. So taking that current event and developing a frequency table around that event, one of the concepts that came to mind was how many languages different people are able to communicate in. With over 1.5 million people expected to participate in the Holy Father's Mass here in Philadelphia, I'm sure there will be many, many languages. So if I were just to take a sample of the survey data, and if I were to interview several people or a number of people as to whether they could speak 2, 3, 4, or 5 languages, I could complete a table using that data. Now, I'm sure you could find many, many other things using the local Catholic newspaper or using data from an event in your local diocese, May procession, or some other event that's occurring in your diocese. It doesn't have to be languages spoken. It could be any common thread that goes through an event. This would be an example in one variable. But if I wanted to use 2 sets of data, I could take that same concept, shows data indicating whether or not the person was a citizen of the United States or a visitor to our country. What other conclusions could you make? So if this is my data here, and this represents that I have the first person I interviewed spoke 2 languages, and those 2 were citizens. Another group, another person spoke 2 languages, and they were a visitor to our country. So if I recorded that data, I would complete a frequency table showing this set of data. So I have the number of languages spoken representing 2 different sets using 2 variables with 2 different sets of data. So working with, at every grade level, I've given you an example of using faith-based values from scriptures to Catholic social values to current events in the church, church history, of how we can relate and how we can bring into our mathematics class, especially in our math class, using the concepts of data and statistics. It's important that we draw the children into understanding our faith through the concepts they're learning, not just in the math class, but in every class. As the bishops who attended the synod on the new evangelization said, if evangelization is to be true to itself, it cannot take place apart from education. It is directly related to it. So if we're going to strengthen the faith of our children, we need to do it with whatever we are teaching them. Our Catholic schools are an integral part of that evangelization. The school is so important. It's an important community by which our families are supported in living a life centered on God. I apologize. As Catholic educators, we are invited to help our students see their relationship with the world, their relationship with others, and their purpose in life as sacred endeavors. And as I said in the beginning, our Catholic bishops have asked us to be teachers like the perfect teacher. We have been asked to teach like Jesus taught. And how can we imitate the greatest teacher of all time unless we integrate our faith values into our teaching? No matter what subject we're teaching, we need to integrate our faith values into that content. I've provided with you with some resources that I've used on it, as well as my own information. I hope that what I've shared with you has been a help. And at this point, I will turn it back to Kate.
Sure. Thank you, Sister Edward. I'm going to let you get some water real quick before I ask you a few questions. But I just want to remind folks or let you know that we will be in Orlando, Florida in 2 very short weeks for the NCEA 2015 Convention and Expo. So if you're in the area or if you'd like to make a break down to Florida, we certainly invite you to come visit us there. And also, I'd like to let you know there are a few more webinars that are coming up this semester. One more on the math initiative and some others. So I invite you to visit our website at www.ncea.org to learn more about these 2 great opportunities. So, Sister, a question that came in, the perspective of the teacher said that public schools in this person's area has what they call data coaches, and it looks like it's some sort of partnership with the local college or university that offers support to schools within this, quote, data coach role. Is that something you've heard of or could be modeled within the Catholic schools?
I am sure. I've had a lot of experience with our local Catholic colleges, and our Catholic colleges are more than willing. I don't know about the secular colleges, but I know our Catholic colleges are very, very interested. Also working with the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities through the NCEA board. I know those Catholic colleges are willing to work with our schools in any capacity they can. I've had a very positive experience here in our area. They are always willing to share their expertise with us, no matter what it is, whether it's data coaches or anything of the kind.
Okay, great.
I can't say I've had experience working with any of the other colleges, the secular colleges in that area.
Okay. And then one last question is, how would you distinguish between Catholic identity lessons and Christian identity lessons?
Well, I think the Catholic identity lessons are much more rooted in the church documents, and in there are some of the examples I gave you that could be both Catholic as well as Christian, because the scriptures are not just Catholic. For example, in the first grade lesson of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, that's scripture-based. So that's Christian, but when we talk about church history or we talk about demographics that are specifically Catholic, well, we are narrowing our perspective to just Catholic identity. Anything that is scriptural-based or is definitely Catholic and Christian, because we are Christians as Catholics. But when we're moving into church documents, church history, then we move into the realm of whether or not it's Catholic specific.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, Sister, you've received a lot of comments thanking you for all the specific examples for the different grade levels, and I think that concludes the questions for this afternoon. So I want to thank you, Sister Edwards, so much for spending your time with us this afternoon and for all that you've shared on this important topic. I'd also like to thank all of you who have attended as well. As a reminder, we will be sending you this recorded webinar and presentation slides in another day or two, and you are certainly invited to contact Sister after the fact by email or by phone with any questions that may come up. Thank you again, and may you enjoy a great evening.